The wet November morning had that grey thickness that swallows sound. On the corner of Millfield Avenue and 3rd Street, a city worker crouched low with a piece of deli chicken pinched between 2 fingers, whispering, "Come on, buddy, come on." The brown dog didn't blink, didn't turn his head, just stared east down the avenue. One ear flopped sideways, reins sliding off his back like the world had forgotten how to touch him. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Carmen Reyes had been driving that same route for 8 months, ever since her mother's funeral, when the shape of every ordinary thing had gone sharp and strange. She wrote for the Hargrove Ledger 4 days a week, city council pieces, zoning fights, a soft profile now and then when Mark decided the front page needed something warm. She had passed the corner of Millfield and 3rd at least 100 times. She had seen the dog. Everyone in that part of town had seen the dog. She had told herself more than once that someone was surely handling it. That morning, she was late for a meeting she didn't want to sit through. Coffee gone cold in the cup holder, wipers dragging across a windshield that never seemed to get clean. She slowed at the light on 3rd and looked. The city worker gave up on the chicken, straightened his back, wiped his hand on his pants, and walked off, shaking his head. The dog didn't shift. His paws were tucked under him, his chest lifted just enough that you could see he was breathing, and his eyes stayed on the far end of the avenue where the buses came from. Something in Carmen's chest folded quietly, and she didn't know why. She pulled her car to the curb and sat with the engine running. She called the office. She said she was chasing something. Mark on the other end sighed the way he always sighed, which meant fine. She hung up and got out of the car with an umbrella she never opened and crossed the sidewalk slowly, because you don't walk fast at a dog that is holding his ground for reasons only he understands. He looked at her, then past her, then east again. She crouched a few feet away, not too close, and let the rain fall on her hair. The dog had a collar, not the shiny nylon kind you buy at the checkout of a pet store, but a proper leather one, worn soft. The stitching faded from what might have been red to a color like old brick. She could see, if she leaned, that letters had been sewn into the leather. She leaned. She read. Scout. She said the name aloud because that seemed the right thing to do. His ear flicked once. That was all. Carmen sat back on her heels. Her knees went wet. She reached slowly and let the back of her hand rest on the sidewalk, palm up. Scout did not move to sniff her. He did not need to. "Who are you waiting for?" she asked quietly, and then felt foolish for asking it, and then understood that the foolish question was the only real one there was. The number 12 bus rounded the corner 3 blocks down, its yellow front lit against the grey, Scout's ears both lifted. His body tensed, just slightly, the way a body tenses at the beginning of hope. The bus rolled up, hissed, opened its doors. A woman in a plastic rain bonnet climbed on. The doors hissed shut. The bus pulled away. Scout's shoulders lowered. He resettled his paws. He looked east again. Carmen stayed there long enough that her jeans went dark from the knees up. Then she stood, and she went to the corner store on the other side of 3rd, and she started asking. The clerk behind the counter was a man named Rafi, with a shaved head and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He nodded when she described the dog. "Scout," he said without waiting for the name. "Been out there since forever. I put food out. Half a hot dog most days. He never touches it while I'm watching. I come back later, and it's gone." He shrugged. "Could be a rat, could be him. Prefer to think it's him." She asked if he knew who Scout belonged to. Rafi's face went quiet. He looked out the window at the corner, at the wet block of sidewalk where the dog sat, and he said, "Victor. That was Victor's dog." "Who is Victor?" "Was," Rafi said. "Victor Hollis. Older gentleman, canvas jacket, one of those flat caps like the old newsboys used to wear. Nice man, quiet. Rode the 12 every weekday morning at 7:15. Been about 2 years now since he passed." "Passed where?" Rafi pointed with his chin. There. Carmen stared at him. She stared at the sidewalk. She stared at the dog. He had a heart attack waiting for the bus, Rafi said. Late October, right before Halloween. Ambulance came, but you know how it is when the ambulance doesn't need to hurry once they get there. My cousin Matteo saw the whole thing from up on the corner of 4th, said the dog was sitting right next to him when he went down and didn't move the whole time the paramedics were working. Wouldn't let them close, but wouldn't stop them either, just watched. When they took Victor away, the dog stayed. And he's been there since. He's been there since. Carmen felt her throat get tight in the strange, familiar way it had been getting tight for 8 months. She thanked Rafi and asked if he knew anything else about Victor, about family, about anyone who might have taken the dog. There's a wife, Rafi said. Ruth. She's over at Sunrise Care Center on Elm Ridge, the one with the big pine tree out front. That's where Victor was going every morning on the 12, to sit with her. She's got the memory thing, dementia. It's bad from what I heard. I don't know if there's anyone else. He never brought anyone else in with him for a coffee or nothing. Just always him, headed east, headed home again. Carmen wrote Ruth Hollis, Sunrise Care Center, Elm Ridge in her notebook. She wrote Victor Hollis, heart attack, late October 2 years back. Then, without meaning to, she wrote he was waiting for the bus. She sat in her car afterwards and looked at the words. Something in her wanted to leave them alone. Something else in her wanted to know how a dog could sit on a sidewalk for 2 years and what it cost him and who owed him the story. She called Mark and told him what she had. He was quiet for a long time. She could hear him tapping the tip of his pen against the edge of his desk, which meant he was thinking about the news budget and the ad slot in the Saturday paper. You want to write it as human interest? He said finally. I don't know what I want yet, she said. I need to talk to the wife. They're not going to let you talk to the wife. I know. HIPAA, dignity, all of that. I know, Mark. He sighed. You've got 2 days. I need a draft by Wednesday if it's going anywhere. She hung up and drove east down Millfield toward Elm Ridge, and the whole way she kept looking in the rearview mirror at the corner behind her, at the shape of the dog that was already becoming small, and she caught herself doing something she hadn't done in 8 months, which was praying, quietly, without knowing to whom. Sunrise Care Center sat under the pine tree exactly as Rafi had said, a low brick building with a covered porch and a wheelchair ramp painted the color of putty. The receptionist, a young woman named Bethany with a tiny gold cross around her neck and a very careful smile, listened to Carmen's request the way people listen when they already know the answer. I'm sorry, she said. I can't confirm or deny that any specific person is a resident here. Ruth Hollis, Carmen said. I only need to know if she's here. I'm sorry. I'm not asking to see her. I'm just trying to find out who to call. There's a dog. Bethany's careful smile faltered, just slightly, and she leaned forward. A dog? Her husband's dog. He waits at the bus stop where Mr. Hollis died every morning. Bethany looked down at the desk, then back up. Her face was different now, not warmer exactly, but something. You can leave your card, she said. I can pass along that you called. If there's an interested party, that's the most I can do. Carmen wrote her card and pushed it across the counter. She wrote Scout on the back in ballpoint pen, and under it she wrote Millfield and 3rd, 7:15. Bethany read it upside down without moving her lips. I hope someone calls you back, Bethany said. Carmen thanked her and turned to leave, and that was when she saw the woman in the pale green scrub top standing in the hallway with her arms crossed over a clipboard, watching her go. The woman was maybe 50, hair pulled tight into a bun, brown skin, dark eyes with lines cut deep at the corners from years of smiling at people who forgot her name every hour. She caught Carmen's eye, held it a beat, and then very slightly tipped her chin toward the front porch. Carmen went out to her car. She started the engine, and she waited. 4 minutes later, the woman in the scrub top came out through the front doors, carrying a stack of paper and a styrofoam cup of coffee, and she walked around the building to the smoke-free brake bench under the pine, where there was no camera. Carmen got out and walked over slowly. The woman said without looking up, "You're the reporter." "I'm Carmen Reyes. I'm Grace. I'm an aide here. I take care of Ruth in the mornings, most days." She sipped her coffee. "I've been here 14 years. I saw Mr. Hollis every weekday morning for the last 6 of those years. I loved that man. He was one of the good ones, and there aren't many good ones." Carmen sat down on the far end of the bench, not too close. "You told Bethany about a dog," Grace said. "Scout." Grace's whole face folded quickly, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. When she took it away, her eyes were wet. "Oh," she said. "Oh, no. I never even asked what happened to the dog. That's an ugly thing to admit, but I didn't. Everything was so much, and I never asked. He's been at the bus stop all this time, every morning." Grace made a sound that was half a laugh and half a moan. "Of course he has," she said. "Of course he has." They sat there in the cold. Grace stared at the parking lot. "Mr. Hollis rode the 12 every weekday for 6 years, she said finally. "Every single one. 7:15 out from Millfield, 7:40 at our door, went right down to the dining room, waited for Ruth to come out of her morning routine, and then he sat with her by the window on the west side, in the yellow chair. He brought a green notebook with him every single day. He read to her out of it, every day for 2 hours. Then he ate lunch with her. Then he took the 12 back home." "What was he reading?" Grace smiled without opening her mouth. "Their life," she said. "That was Ruth and Victor's life. He'd written it all down, every bit of it, from the day they met at a diner on Route 2 in 1969, to their wedding, to when Kelly was born, to the summer they took her to see the Great Lakes, to the day they retired. Every story. He'd read her one every morning, sometimes 2. Sometimes he'd start one, and she'd finish it because there'd be a piece of it lodged in her that he'd never touched, and he'd stop and let her go. And she'd talk for a whole minute once about how her mother taught her to fry an egg. She hadn't spoken about her mother in a year at that point, but he read her that story about their honeymoon, and there she was. Carmen didn't say anything. Her throat was doing its familiar thing. He was her memory, Grace said. When he read to her, she was there. She was in it. She'd hold his hand. She'd laugh sometimes. She'd cry once in a while. When he stopped reading, she'd fade back out. But those 2 hours every morning, he brought her home. And when he died, Grace looked down into her coffee. When he died, we lost her too. She stopped speaking within a few months. She stopped eating without help within 6. She's been quiet mostly for a year and a half now. Sometimes she'll say a word if the light hits the window a certain way. Sometimes she'll take my hand. Mostly she just watches the yard. "The notebook," Carmen said. "Where is it?" Grace shook her head. "I don't know. He would have had it with him that morning, I imagine. He never went without it. Whatever was in his pockets went to the hospital, and then to his daughter, I suppose. The daughter. Kelly, you've done your homework." "Rafi at the corner store did most of it for me." Grace nodded. "Kelly lives out in Oregon, Portland, I think. She hasn't been here in a while. She and Ruth had something. I don't know what. Victor tried to bridge it, and I don't know how much of it he managed. He didn't talk about family here. He talked about the past, and the past he talked about mostly to Ruth." Carmen wrote Kelly, Portland, Oregon. She wrote green notebook. She wrote yellow chair. "Can I write about this?" she asked. Grace looked at her for a long time. "You can write about the dog," she said. "That's yours. I'll deny I told you anything if I have to, but if you write it right, and if it moves the right person, then maybe something. I don't know. I'm not supposed to be doing this at all." She got up. She paused at the corner of the building. "His name was Scout because Ruth loved that book," she said. "The one with the little girl. She read it to Kelly every year on Kelly's birthday, all the way through high school. That's what he told me the first week he came in with a new puppy under his arm." She went back inside. Carmen sat on the bench a long time. The pine dripped. The parking lot was empty except for two dented sedans and a pickup with a Steelers sticker peeling off the back window. She wrote Scout from a book about a father and a daughter, and she looked at what she had written and she pressed the notebook to her chest. She drove back to Millfield and 3rd at 4 in the afternoon. Scout was still there. The rain had stopped and started twice. His eyes were still east. She sat on the sidewalk beside him. Not close, not touching. She sat there until it got dark, and then she went home. Her apartment on Cedar Street was small and beige and had 8 months of unopened sympathy cards in a wooden bowl on the kitchen counter. She dropped her bag on the couch and sat at her mother's old kitchen table and opened her laptop. She typed a name at the top of a blank document, Victor Hollis. Then she typed another, Ruth Hollis. Then she typed the words that had been sitting in her chest since morning. He is still waiting for the bus. She wrote for 4 hours. She did not stop to eat. When she was done, it was 1 page. She had cut it down twice. She read it 3 times through. She sent it to Mark before she could talk herself out of it. Mark called her back at midnight. "This is not a news story," he said. "This is a poem." "I know. We're going to run it," he said. "Thursday, front of the Metro section. Photo above the fold if we can get a decent one. Can we get a decent one? Raffi has a Nikon he brags about. I'll ask him. Get a decent one." He hung up. Carmen sat at the table another 20 minutes with her hands folded in front of her, and then she got up and took one of the sympathy cards out of the bowl for the first time and opened it. It was from her neighbor, Mrs. Petroff, and it said in shaky ink, "Your mother was very kind to my son when he was sick. I owe her. I owe you too. Come by if you want tea." Carmen sat down on the kitchen floor and cried for the first time since April. The next morning, she went back to the corner with Raffi and his Nikon. Raffi took 28 photographs. The one they used was the 11th, taken low from the west side of the bus stop, showing Scout in profile with his one flopped ear and his eyes catching the first pale sun the week had offered, looking east down an empty avenue. Under the photograph, the caption Carmen wrote read simply, "Scout, on the corner of Millfield and 3rd, waiting." The story ran Thursday morning. Carmen didn't sleep Wednesday night. She went to the corner at 7:14 with 2 coffees, one for herself and one for Raffi, and they stood together on the far side of 3rd and watched the number 12 bus roll up and pull away. Scout tensed and untensed exactly the way he always did. Neither of them said anything. Raffi drank his coffee. Carmen shivered. By 10 in the morning, Thursday, the Ledger's phone lines had lit up. By noon, 3 people had left flowers at the corner. By 4 in the afternoon, the online version of the story had been shared 11,000 times. By dinner time, it had been shared 42,000. Mark came to Carmen's desk with his hands in his pockets and his mouth open a little bit, the way he looked when he was surprised, which was not often. "Well," he said. "Yeah." "Well?" She smiled a small, tired smile. He tapped her desk twice. "Good work, Reyes." He went back to his office. She sat and stared at her monitor and refreshed the story once, and then she made herself stop. Friday morning at 8:17, her phone rang. She was in the parking lot of the office building holding a bagel she had not yet unwrapped. The number was blocked. "Ms. Reyes?" "Yes." "This is Bethany from Sunrise Care Center. Someone here would like to speak with you." "Please hold." Carmen dropped the bagel. She fumbled it against her chest and caught it and got it back into the paper bag with one hand. On the line, she heard Bethany walking, a door closing, and then Grace's voice, quiet and shaking. "Carmen." "Grace." She said his name. Carmen leaned against the side of her car. She closed her eyes. She said, "Who did?" "Ruth." Ruth said his name. I brought her the paper. I opened it up to the picture. I put it on her lap. She looked at it for a long time. I don't know how long. And then she said very clearly, "Scout." And then she said again, "Scout." And then she reached out with her finger and she touched the ink where his face is, and she said it a 3rd time. Scout. Carmen, she hasn't said a full word in over a year. She said it 3 times. Carmen said, "Oh." Grace's voice was thick. "I need you to bring him." Carmen said, "Where is he?" "You don't know?" "I haven't been there since yesterday morning. I've been in the office." Grace made a small sound. "Animal control came Wednesday night. Somebody in the neighborhood called it in. Carmen, they took him. He's at the county shelter on Route 16. I called ahead when I saw the paper. He's still there." Carmen was already moving to her driver's side door. "I'll go now. I called ahead. I told them a family member was coming. I told them you were the family member. I don't know if that will work, but I said it. Bring him fast, Carmen. I don't know how long she'll hold on to it." She hung up. Carmen drove to the county shelter with her hands shaking on the wheel. The shelter was a low concrete building with a chain-link kennel out back and a lobby that smelled like disinfectant and dog. The woman at the counter was named Danica. Danica had a lanyard full of pins. 2 of the pins were about spaying and neutering. One was a rainbow. One said, "Adopt, don't shop." "I'm here for a brown dog," Carmen said. "One flopped ear, collar says Scout, came in Wednesday night from the 3rd Street bus stop." Danica's face lit up. "Oh, honey," she said, "you're the reporter." "I'm the reporter." "He's been fine. He's been so fine. He's not eaten a whole lot, but he drank water and he slept. He's a good boy. He's in Kennel 11. Come on." She led Carmen back through a set of swinging doors, past rows of kennels where dogs jumped and barked and pressed their noses through wire, past a beagle with cataracts who sat and howled, past a pit mix who wagged so hard her back end hit both walls, all the way to the end, where the last kennel on the left held a medium brown dog with one flopped ear who was lying with his chin on his paws and his eyes closed. He was not curled tight. He was just lying, as if he had run out of ways to sit up. Danica opened the door. Carmen went in slowly and crouched. She said his name. Scout opened his eyes. He looked at her. He did not lift his head. She stayed there a long moment. Then she said, "Do you want to come see her?" She wasn't sure why she said it that way, only that it seemed like the only way to say it. Scout lifted his head. Danica made a small noise behind her. Carmen held out her hand, palm up, low. Scout leaned forward. He sniffed her wrist. Then very slowly he stood, all the joints of him seeming to remember themselves one at a time. And he walked toward her. The paperwork took 45 minutes. Danica had to call her supervisor, who had to call the city, who had to call the on-call attorney for the county, who signed off on a temporary foster release with Carmen listed as an authorized visitor for Ruth Hollis of Sunrise Care Center. Danica hugged Carmen when they came back out to the lobby with Scout on a red slip lead. "You bring him back if it doesn't work, okay?" Danica said. "But you bring him back, not somebody else. You." "I will. And you come tell me how she is." "I will." Carmen drove to Sunrise, with Scout in the passenger seat. He sat upright, ears at attention, watching everything they passed. When they turned onto Elm Ridge and the pine came into view, his tail thumped once against the seat. Grace was waiting on the porch in her scrubs, with her arms wrapped around her middle. Bethany was in the doorway, holding it open. When Scout jumped down from the car, he stood on the sidewalk for a second, and he looked at Grace, and he made a small sound that was not a bark and not a whine, but something older than both. Grace crouched. She said, "Hello, sweetheart. Hello. Come on." Scout went to her. He pressed the top of his head into her collarbone. Grace held him there and cried without making a sound. Bethany was crying too. Carmen was somewhere past crying and could only breathe. "She's in the common room," Grace said, her voice thick. "Yellow chair by the window. She's in the yellow cardigan today. She only wears it when? I don't know. She only wears it some days. She wore it today." They walked in together, all 3 of them and the dog. The common room had wall-to-wall carpet in a shade that had been chosen 20 years ago to hide stains. There were 4 residents in it. 2 watched television with the sound low. 1 did a crossword with a pencil that had no eraser. One was Ruth, in a yellow cardigan, in a yellow chair by the west-facing window, her hands folded in her lap, her hair combed carefully back, looking out at the parking lot where a plastic bag was blowing across the concrete. Grace touched her shoulder. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth, look who came." Ruth did not turn her head. She did not look away from the window. Grace's face fell. She glanced at Carmen. Carmen felt something cold walk up her spine. Scout stood in the doorway with his ears up. Grace crouched beside Ruth's chair. "Ruth," she said gently, "sweetheart, Scout is here." Ruth's fingers moved. Only a little. The tip of her thumb ran once across the knuckle of her forefinger. Her mouth stayed closed. The room seemed to go very quiet. Even the television seemed to go quiet. Carmen looked at Scout. He was watching Ruth. He had not moved. Then he did. He walked across the carpet, slowly, without hurry, past the coffee table with the magazines fanned out, past the man doing the crossword, past the 2 on the couch. He reached the yellow chair. He sat down beside it. He looked up at Ruth. Then, gently, he rested his chin on her knee. Ruth's hands unfolded, not fast, not dramatic, only the way hands unfold when they have been folded for a long time. They came down on either side of Scout's head, and her palms pressed against his ears, and she held on. She did not speak, she did not smile. Her eyes did not seem to move at all, but she held on. Scout closed his eyes. Grace put both hands over her mouth and stepped backwards out of the room. Bethany followed her. Carmen stayed in the doorway because someone had to see, someone had to remember, someone had to be able to write it down later. For 11 minutes, nobody spoke. Ruth kept her palms on Scout's ears. Scout kept his chin on her knee. The plastic bag outside the window blew away and out of sight. The television played a commercial for a mattress. The old man with the crossword finished his puzzle and set his pencil down and looked over at Ruth and started, without speaking, to cry. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his sweater. He kept sitting there. Ruth's thumb, on the left side of Scout's face, began moving in a small, slow circle just behind his ear. Carmen realized she was leaning against the doorframe with all her weight, and that her legs were not entirely holding her up. She sat down on the floor of the doorway. She put her head against the jamb. She listened to a room breathe. Later, Grace came back in with tissues. Later, Bethany brought a small paper cup of water for Ruth, and Grace held it while Ruth drank, and Ruth swallowed the whole cup without prompting for the first time in weeks. Later, Scout climbed carefully up into the yellow chair, one paw at a time, and curled himself into a ball against Ruth's hip. And Ruth did not startle, did not stiffen, did not push him away. She only lowered her chin toward the crown of his head and closed her eyes. Carmen stayed until 4 in the afternoon. When she left, Ruth was asleep with Scout beside her. In the parking lot, Grace grabbed both of Carmen's arms. "There's something else," Grace said. "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" Grace pulled Carmen closer to the pine, out of sight of the front doors. "You know how I said Ruth won't let anyone touch her cardigan pocket? You didn't say that." "I didn't?" "You didn't." "Well, she doesn't. Not once in 2 years. If we try to take the cardigan off her at night, we have to be very careful with the right pocket. If we get anywhere near it, she goes rigid and won't let go, and then we have to leave the cardigan on her under her nightgown. We've never seen what's in there, nobody has. Whatever is in that right pocket, she has held onto for 2 years. You never took the cardigan off? Only when we absolutely had to. We wash it dry. She doesn't allow, we don't fight her. It's not worth it." Grace's eyes were wide. She reached in there today, while Scout was on her lap, right at the end, before he went to sleep. She reached into her pocket and she took something out, and she held it up and she put it in Scout's fur. like she was hiding it there. I saw her do it. I didn't say anything because I thought it might break the moment. But whatever it is, it's in his coat right now. Grace? I don't know what it is, Carmen. I don't know if I want to know, but it's something. Carmen turned back to look at sunrise. The west window was lit by the last of the sun. She thought she could see, if she squinted, the top of Ruth's head still resting against the top of Scout's, in the yellow chair, in the yellow cardigan. I'll come back tomorrow, she said. We'll take him for a walk. I'll check his coat then. Bring me coffee, Grace said. Bring me a big one, because I don't think I'm sleeping tonight. Carmen didn't either. At home, she wrote the second story, the one that was going to run Saturday morning. She wrote about the yellow chair and the yellow cardigan and the way Ruth's hands unfolded. She did not write about the pocket. That was not hers yet. At 2 a.m, her phone rang. She answered without checking. Hello, a woman's voice on the other end, rough with exhaustion, careful. Is this the reporter? Yes. My name is Kelly Hollis. I saw your story in Oregon. I saw the second story you posted online tonight. I need to come home. Carmen sat up in bed. Ms. Hollis. Kelly? Kelly. Where are you now? I'm at the Portland airport. My flight board's in 90 minutes. I get into Cleveland at 11:20 tomorrow morning. I need to see my mother. I need to see the dog. I don't know if either of them will know me. I don't know if I have the right. Her voice broke. I haven't been home in 4 years, Ms. Reyes. Carmen, my father and I, we had a bad time. The last time I saw them together, I said things. I said he was in denial. I said he was hurting himself pretending she was still there when she wasn't. I said the reading, the notebook, the routines, I said all of it was. I said it was his sickness, not hers. Kelly stopped. She took a breath. He told me I could come see her when I could see her, and I didn't come. And then he was gone and I didn't come. And then my mother was. I told myself she wouldn't know me anyway. I told myself that every day for 2 years, and now there's a dog, and now she said his name. Carmen said, Kelly, come home. Come see her. I'm coming. I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens with my mother. I don't know what happens with the house. Nobody has been in the house. Where is the house? 1622 Larkspur Lane. Carmen wrote it down. There's a spare key, Kelly said, in a fake rock next to the front step, if you have any way. I don't know. I know it's an imposition. I don't know if this is legal. I don't have a right to ask you this. My father's canvas jacket is on the hook by the front door. If you could, if there is anything in the pockets. He always carried the notebook. He always. Kelly. He always carried it. I'll go now, Carmen said. I'll go in the morning. First light. I'll call you when I have anything. Kelly cried on the other end for a long minute. Then she said, thank you. Carmen didn't sleep. At 6:30 in the morning, she was on Larkspur Lane. The house was a small brick ranch with white shutters and a hedge that had gone half wild. The fake rock was under the boxwood by the front step. The key was inside. She opened the door and stood in the little entryway with her hand still on the knob, because for a moment it felt as though the 2 years of dust and silence in that house had walked out to greet her and were now, courteously, waiting for her to say what she was doing there. She said out loud, I'm Carmen Reyes. I'm a friend of Kelly's. She wasn't. Not yet. But it felt like the polite thing to say. The canvas jacket was on the hook by the front door. She lifted it down. It was heavier than she had expected. She checked the right outside pocket. Empty. She checked the left outside pocket. Empty. She checked the inner pocket, where a man might keep a wallet. Empty. She turned the jacket over. There was a zippered pocket sewn into the lining, the kind for a passport or a small book. Her hand shook as she unzipped it. The green notebook slid halfway out into her palm. cloth-covered, corners frayed, a rubber band around it. She sat down on the floor of the entryway of a house where she had never been before, and she cried in a way she had not been able to cry for 8 months, and she held the notebook against her chest without opening it. When she could, she got up. She locked the door. She put the fake rock back. She got in her car. She drove to Sunrise. Grace was already at the front desk with a paper cup of coffee for Carmen. Scout was on a beach towel on the floor of the office, eating soft food from a stainless steel bowl. Carmen showed Grace the notebook. Grace put her hands on her chest. "Oh," Grace said. "Oh, Victor. Kelly's flight lands at 11:20. I'll get Ruth ready." Carmen drove to the airport with the notebook in the passenger seat under her jacket. She parked in the short-term lot, and she stood at arrivals for a long time. Kelly came down the escalator in a wrinkled black sweater and jeans with paint on the knees. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band. She had her mother's mouth and her father's chin and eyes that had not slept in a long, long time. She saw Carmen. She stopped on the second-to-last step of the escalator. Carmen held up the notebook. Kelly put her hand on the rail. She came the last 2 steps very slowly. She said, "Is that?" "It is." She took it. She held it against her mouth. She did not open it. In the car, she said, "You are a very kind stranger." "I don't feel like a stranger anymore." "No," Kelly said, "you don't." She looked at Hargrove out the passenger window as they drove east on the interstate. She said, "This town looks exactly the same. It hasn't changed much. That's what I liked about it when I lived here," she said, "and that's what I hated about it when I left." They drove to Sunrise. Grace was on the porch in a fresh set of scrubs and a coat because it was cold now, and she had done her hair. She had brought Scout out on the leash, and Scout was sitting beside her, ears up, watching the parking lot. Kelly got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk. She looked at Scout, and Scout looked at her, and Scout's tail wagged once, uncertainly, because he did not remember her, but he could feel that she was the last person he was going to be introduced to today. And he had figured out, somewhere in the last 24 hours, that this was a day of introductions. Kelly crouched down. "Hello, Scout," she said. "I'm Kelly. I'm Ruth's daughter. I heard about you from a lady named Carmen." Scout took 2 steps forward. He put his nose against her cheek. Kelly closed her eyes. Inside, Ruth was in the yellow chair, in the yellow cardigan. She was looking out at the parking lot. When Kelly walked in, Ruth did not turn. Kelly stopped in the doorway. Grace stepped up beside her. "Take your time, honey." Kelly walked over slowly. She sat in the chair beside her mother. She reached out and put her hand on top of Ruth's hand. Ruth's fingers curled around hers. Just a little. Reflex, maybe. Maybe not. "Mom," Kelly said. "It's me. It's Kelly." Ruth did not turn. Kelly bit her lip. She looked at Carmen in the doorway. Carmen came in with the notebook in her hands and set it on the small table beside the yellow chair. Kelly looked down at it. She picked it up. She undid the rubber band. She opened it to the last written page. Victor's handwriting was neat and slanted and small in dark blue ink, the way old men who had once worked in insurance still wrote. The last entry was dated the 28th of October, 2 years ago. It was a page and a half long. It was about a summer trip to the Sleeping Bear Dunes in 1978, when Kelly had been 7, and how Kelly had climbed to the top of the dune ahead of them and had turned around and had shouted to her parents at the bottom, "You guys are so small." And how Victor had told Ruth then on that dune that if the world got small enough that they could hold it in their hands, then they were going to hold it together. Kelly read this aloud. Her voice broke on the word small. She kept reading. She got to the last line of the last entry, which was the words, "And now you tell it." She had to stop. She looked at her mother. Ruth's mouth moved. Kelly held her breath. Ruth said quietly, "Small." Kelly made a sound. She pressed the notebook against her chest. She said, "Yes, Mama, yes." Ruth said, "Small." She said it again. She said it a third time, softer, almost a whisper. Then she reached down without turning, and she put her hand on top of Scout's head, and she closed her eyes. Kelly cried onto the notebook. Grace cried into the sleeve of her scrubs. Carmen stood in the doorway and understood, finally, that she was not the writer of this story. She was just its witness. That afternoon, Carmen drove Kelly to Larkspur Lane. Kelly stood on the sidewalk for a long time before she went in. Carmen offered to leave her alone. Kelly asked her to come in. They walked through the small brick ranch together. Every room was exactly as Victor had left it. There was a coffee mug in the sink with a dried ring at the bottom. There was a wall calendar in the kitchen, still turned to October 2 years ago, with the 28th circled in red pen and a small heart drawn next to the 8. Kelly went into her old bedroom. Her twin bed was still made. Her track trophies were still on the shelf. Above the desk was a bulletin board with a picture of her at 19 with a boy named Ryan, and a picture of her mother in the yellow cardigan holding a puppy, and a note in her mother's handwriting that said, "Kel, dinner Sunday, love Mom." Kelly took the note down carefully with 2 fingers and held it against her chest. She said, "I always thought she forgot me first." Carmen said, "She didn't." "He wouldn't have let her," Kelly said. "Would he?" "No, he wouldn't have." Kelly nodded. She put the note into the pocket of her sweater. She kept it there. That evening at sunrise, Grace pulled Carmen aside. "There is a man in the front hall who says he needs to speak with you," she said. "I told him it wasn't visiting hours. He says he doesn't need to see Ruth. He says he needs to see you." Carmen walked out to the front hall. Standing by the door was a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with silver hair cut close to his scalp and a Cleveland Browns hat in his hand. He wore a navy work jacket with a patch on the shoulder that said Hargrove Transit Authority. His face was ruined by the effort of not crying. He said, "Ms. Reyes." "Carmen, my name is Dennis Park. I have driven the number 12 bus for 18 years. I knew Victor Hollis. I want to ask you something." She said, "Please." He turned the hat in his hands. "I never told anyone this," he said, "but I have been putting a bowl of water out for that dog at the corner of Millfield and 3rd every winter morning since the morning Victor died. I'd get to the stop 3 minutes early on my first run. I'd get out and put the bowl down beside the pole. On days it froze, I'd bring hot water in a thermos. I'd never touch him. He didn't want touching. But I couldn't sit up in my seat and drive away every morning without doing something," Carmen said. "Dennis." He put his hat over his face. He pulled it away. He said, "That dog has been on my route for 2 years. That corner was my corner. Victor was on my bus for 6 years, and I never really talked to him except to say good morning and read your paper, sir. And now I'm too late." He shook his head. "But I want to ask you. I want to ask, is there anybody looking to keep him? Because if there is nobody, I would like to keep him. I have a fenced yard. I have a wife who has been begging me to get a dog for 4 years. I have a heated garage. I would love him. I would love him properly." Carmen said, "Mr. Park." "Dennis." "Dennis." I think that would be an extraordinary answer to a question we haven't figured out how to ask yet. "You think so?" "I think so." He nodded. He put his hat back on. He looked at his boots. "When can I meet him?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," Carmen said. "The corner of Millfield and 3rd, 7:15. He went out into the parking lot. She watched him from the door. The next morning, Carmen was at the corner at 7:12 with Scout on a red slip lead and Kelly beside her with her hands in her sleeves against the cold. Dennis was already there. He was standing beside the bus stop pole. Beside him on the sidewalk was a stainless steel bowl of fresh water. Scout stopped when he saw the bowl. He looked at Dennis. Dennis crouched. He put out his hand palm up. He did not speak. Scout walked across the sidewalk. He sniffed Dennis's fingers. Then, without ceremony, he sat down beside Dennis, faced east, and waited for the number 12 bus. Dennis, on his morning off, stayed there with him for the entire 15-minute run. When the number 12 came around the corner 3 blocks down, Scout tensed. The bus pulled up. The doors hissed open. A different driver was at the wheel. Scout looked at the driver. He looked at the empty seat behind him. He turned his head very slowly, and he looked up at Dennis. Dennis put his hand very gently on the top of Scout's head. Scout stood up. He stepped away from the bus. He pressed his shoulder against Dennis's leg. The doors hissed shut. The bus pulled away. Scout watched it go. Then he sat down again, facing east. Dennis said quietly, "It's okay. We can wait as long as you want." They waited another 45 minutes. Then Scout stood up. He shook himself all the way from his nose to his tail. He walked to the water bowl. He drank the whole thing. Kelly, watching this from beside Carmen, put her fist against her mouth. "He knows," Kelly whispered. "He knows he doesn't have to wait alone anymore." Carmen said, "Yeah." The formal adoption paperwork went through the following Wednesday. Danica from the shelter did the transfer herself and refused to take a fee. She wrote "no fee" at the top of the paperwork in green ink and drew a small smiley face beside it. Dennis's wife Louise took a photograph of Scout in their kitchen the first evening they brought him home, sitting on the tiled floor beside a green tartan dog bed, looking up at the camera with his ears symmetrical for the first time in anyone's memory. The flopped one somehow standing up straight in surprise at the new house. Louise had the photograph framed. She hung it above the wood stove. Kelly stayed in Hargrove. She sat with Ruth every day. She read from the green notebook every morning. Grace taught her how to feed her mother and how to smooth down her mother's hair the way Ruth had liked, 20 years ago, before the world got quiet inside her. Some days Ruth said a word, some days she did not. On the days she did not, Kelly kept reading anyway, because Victor had. That was what he had done. That was how it worked. Kelly moved into the little brick ranch on Larkspur Lane. She did not sell the house. She washed the coffee mug. She turned the calendar to the current month. She left the small red heart drawn beside the 8th of October where it was. She left the canvas jacket on the hook. Carmen wrote the 3rd story on a Wednesday night in early December. She wrote it in a way she hadn't written anything since her mother had died. She wrote it slowly and honestly, and without trying to make anyone feel anything, because the story was doing all the feeling itself and did not need her help. She wrote it about Dennis and the bowl of water. She wrote it about Kelly and the notebook. She wrote it about Ruth and the yellow chair. She wrote it about the dog, whose name was Scout, who had waited for 2 years on a piece of sidewalk in a small town in Ohio, and who was now, at long last, going home. The story ran Thursday. The following Saturday, in the 2nd week of December, a small crowd gathered at the corner of Millfield and 3rd. It was not a scheduled event. There was no press release. Someone had told someone, and that person had told someone else. Rafi came out from the corner store in his warmest coat. Grace came in her civilian clothes with Bethany, both of them holding paper cups of coffee. Louise came with a scarf that had reindeer on it, holding Scout on a new blue leash. Dennis came in his transit jacket with his hat in his hands. Kelly pushed her mother Ruth in a wheelchair, wrapped in a red wool blanket, with the yellow cardigan buttoned all the way to the collar underneath. Neighbors came. Bus regulars came. Danica from the shelter came with 2 puppies in her arms, who were not up for adoption, but who she thought could use the fresh air. The city worker who had crouched with the deli chicken on that first wet morning came with his wife. There were maybe 40 people in all. Near the bus stop pole, low to the ground, was a small bronze marker on a stake. A local veterans organization had made it. Victor had served 2 years in the army, 66 to 68, and had been quiet about it his whole life. The marker had his name and the years he had lived, and beneath that, in raised letters, 3 words. He was here. Carmen was going to speak. She had prepared a small paragraph on the drive over. When she got out of her car and saw the crowd and saw Ruth in the wheelchair and saw Scout sitting beside Dennis with his ears up, she folded the paragraph and put it in her pocket. She did not read it. She stood by the marker. She waited until everyone had gone quiet. She said, "My mother died in April." Nobody had expected her to open with that. She felt Kelly across the circle catch her breath. She kept going. "For 8 months I have driven past this corner. For 8 months I have not stopped. I have not stopped because I couldn't feel anything, and I couldn't feel anything because I was pretending I wasn't grieving, so I could keep going to work and to the grocery store and to my apartment, where I have a bowl of unopened sympathy cards on my kitchen counter that I still have not touched. All of them together weigh what a small dog weighs. I know that because I picked the bowl up last night." She looked at Scout. Scout was watching her. "When I saw this dog for the first time up close 2 weeks ago," she said, "I understood that I had been driving past my own heart for 8 months, and that a dog on a sidewalk in Hargrove, Ohio, had been doing my grieving for me. He knew how to sit still with love. I had forgotten. He had not forgotten anything." She paused. The wind came up. It rattled the dry leaves in the pear tree on the corner. "2 things about grief," she said. "First, that it doesn't leave. Second, that it doesn't need to. It only needs a place to sit. You can build the place. You can make it out of a bowl of water on a cold sidewalk. You can make it out of a notebook full of old summers. You can make it out of a yellow chair by a window that faces west. You can make it out of a bus route that you drive every weekday for 18 years. You can make it out of a corner where a man used to stand and where a dog sat for 2 years waiting for him. You can even sometimes make it out of a plaque that says nothing except that a person was here." She touched the top of the plaque with her gloved hand. "Victor Hollis was here," she said. "Ruth Hollis is still here. Scout was here, and now Scout is home. My mother was here. Your people were here. All of them are still here in the shape of the places they left us." She stepped back. The crowd was very still. Kelly wheeled her mother forward. Ruth's eyes were on the plaque. Kelly bent down and whispered something to her mother. Ruth's hand came up out of the blanket. Her fingers touched the raised letters. She held her fingers there. Ruth said quietly, "Victor." Kelly nodded. She said, "Yes, Mama, yes." Ruth said it again. She said, "Victor." Then she said, "Scout." Dennis brought Scout forward on the blue leash. Scout stepped up to the wheelchair. He put his chin very gently on Ruth's knee. Ruth's hand came off the plaque and came down on Scout's head. Her palm pressed his floppy ear. She held on. Somewhere in the crowd someone was crying. Then several people were. Then it was just the sound of a small town crying with dignity, which sounds like nothing much at all, and which is one of the finest sounds a place can make. At the edge of the circle, Raffi wiped his eyes on the sleeve of his coat and said, to no one in particular, "That's a good dog." Louise, holding the end of the blue leash loosely in her hand, said, "That's the best dog." Dennis said, "That's my dog." Scout thumped his tail against the sidewalk, once, twice, 3 times. Then the number 12 bus rolled around the corner 3 blocks down, exactly on schedule. 7:15 was long past on a Saturday morning, but the mid-morning route ran at 10:32, and the sound of it was familiar to everyone there. The bus pulled up to the stop. The driver, a woman named Angela, who had heard about the gathering and had swung her route slightly to come by, opened the doors. Nobody got on. Angela sat with the doors open, one hand on the wheel, and she looked out at the crowd on her sidewalk. She looked at the plaque. She looked at Scout. She reached under her seat. She lifted up a small stainless steel bowl. She set it on the dash so everyone could see it. Then she closed the doors slowly, and she pulled away, gentle as she could. Ruth, in the wheelchair, followed the bus with her eyes. She said quietly, one word. She said, "Home." Kelly bent down and kissed the top of her mother's head. She said, "Yes, Mama, we are." Carmen stood at the edge of the circle for a long time after the crowd began to break up. She watched Dennis lead Scout back toward his car, Louise's arm around his waist. She watched Kelly wheel her mother slowly along the sidewalk to the accessible van that Sunrise had sent. She watched Grace and Bethany hug each other by the pear tree. She watched Raffi lock up the corner store for the first time in his memory in the middle of a Saturday and cross the street to give Dennis a plastic bag with hot dogs in it for the dog for later. She watched the empty bus stop. The wind came again. The plaque did not move. The sidewalk was still just sidewalk. She walked over. She sat down on the concrete in exactly the place where Scout had sat for 2 years. She looked east down Millfield Avenue. The avenue was empty. The buses were not running for another 22 minutes. The pear tree above her rattled its dry leaves. A single sparrow landed on the arm of the bus stop sign and stared at her sideways. Carmen closed her eyes. She thought of her mother. She thought of the sympathy cards. She thought of the kitchen table on Cedar Street where she had eaten breakfast alone every morning for 8 months while pretending she was still just a person on her way to work. She thought of the bowl on the counter. She said in her head, not out loud, "I'm sorry it took me so long, Mom. I'm sorry I drove past you." She opened her eyes. The avenue was still empty. But a woman across the street had come out onto her porch to shake out a rug, and the woman waved at Carmen when she saw her sitting there, and Carmen waved back. She stood up. She brushed off the seat of her jeans. She walked to her car. She drove home. She parked. She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment on Cedar Street. She unlocked the door. She went to the kitchen counter. She looked at the wooden bowl full of 8 months of sympathy cards. She sat down at the kitchen table. She reached for the bowl. She began, 1 card at a time, to open them. The first card, from Mrs. Petrov, she had already opened. The second card was from her mother's sister, her Aunt Delia, who lived in New Mexico and whom she had not seen in a decade. It said, "Your mother told me every time we talked that she was proud of you. I am also proud of you. Come see me if you ever get too tired of Ohio." The third card was from a woman named Josephine, whom she did not immediately recognize, until she read the note which said, "I was in your mother's book club for 12 years. She always said your columns made her smile. I read every single one, every week for you, because she asked me to keep an eye. I still do." Carmen laid her head down on the table. Some things she understood then do not need to be waited for on a sidewalk. Some things can be found in a wooden bowl on a kitchen counter, but you have to be willing to open them. Outside, the sun was breaking through the thin winter clouds over Hargrove. Somewhere across town, in a small brick ranch on Larkspur Lane, Kelly was making her mother a cup of tea. Somewhere else, in a warm kitchen with a wood stove, Dennis Park was sitting cross-legged on the tile floor with a dog in his lap, feeding him a piece of hot dog by hand. Somewhere else, in a yellow chair by a west-facing window, Ruth Hollis, in her yellow cardigan, was watching the parking lot. And the plastic bag that blew across the concrete now was, for the first time in a very long time, being watched by a woman who knew, exactly and without any effort at all, that her name was Ruth, and that the man who used to sit beside her was named Victor, and that she had loved him for 52 years, and that he had, in the very last of his mornings, told her a story about a dune in Michigan on which their daughter Kelly had once stood at the age of 7, and shouted down to them, "You guys are so small," and that even now, with all the world made small, they were, all of them, holding it together. Ruth reached into her cardigan pocket. She took out what she had kept there for 2 years. It was a small photograph, laminated in clear plastic, of a young Victor at 19 years old, in his army uniform, standing on a train platform with his arm around a girl in a summer dress. The girl in the summer dress had Ruth's smile. The photograph had been in Victor's wallet on the morning he died. Kelly had found it later in the plastic bag from the hospital, and she had brought it to her mother on her last visit 4 years ago, and her mother had put it in the pocket of the yellow cardigan and had held on to it every day since. Ruth looked at the photograph. She traced the girl in the summer dress with her thumb. She smiled, the smallest smile. She said quietly, "Ruth." She had not said her own name in more than a year. Grace, coming into the room with a small plate of crackers and cheese, stopped in the doorway. She did not move. She did not breathe. Ruth said it again. "Ruth." Grace put the plate down carefully on the coffee table. She walked over to the yellow chair. She sat down in the chair beside it. She took Ruth's hand. "Yes, sweetheart," Grace said. "Yes, that's you." Ruth said, "Ruth." Grace said, "Yes." Ruth turned her head slowly. She looked at Grace. Her eyes focused for a moment the way they had used to focus. She said, "You are Grace." Grace could not answer. Ruth said, "Where is Victor?" Grace held her hand tighter. She said gently, "Victor is gone, sweetheart. He's been gone 2 years, but he loved you very much, and your daughter Kelly is home now. She's going to come see you in an hour. And there's a dog named Scout. He's your dog. Do you remember him?" Ruth was quiet a long moment. She said, "I remember." She said, "I remember." She looked out at the parking lot. The plastic bag had blown away. A small brown sparrow was hopping across the pavement. She watched it. She did not let go of Grace's hand. Then she said quietly, "Tell Kelly to bring the notebook." Grace pressed her free hand against her mouth. "I will," Grace said. "I will, honey. I'll tell her right now." She stood up. She walked out into the hallway. She pulled out her phone. She called Kelly. When Kelly answered, Grace said, "Sweetheart, bring the notebook. Bring it now." She asked for it. Kelly was quiet a long moment. Then Kelly said, "I'm coming." Grace hung up. She walked back into the common room. She sat down in the chair beside Ruth. She held Ruth's hand. They sat like that for 20 minutes. When Kelly came in with the green notebook against her chest, Ruth turned her head at the sound of her daughter's footsteps. Her eyes went bright. Her mouth opened. She said, "Kelly." Kelly's face broke. Ruth said, "Kelly, come here." Kelly went. She knelt beside the chair. She put her head against her mother's shoulder. Ruth's hand came up. It rested on the back of Kelly's head. It stroked her hair slowly, twice. "Mama," Kelly said, "you came home." Ruth said, "I came home." "Read to me." "I'll read to you." Kelly opened the notebook. She did not need to look for a page. She turned to the last written entry, the 28th of October, 2 years ago, the story about the dune. She began to read. Ruth closed her eyes. She listened. When Kelly got to the last line, the line Victor had left unfinished, the line that said, "And now you tell it," Kelly stopped reading. She looked at her mother. Ruth's eyes were still closed. Her mouth was moving. She was mouthing the words her daughter had just read. Then she opened her eyes. She said quietly, "The wind on the top of the dune smelled like water. You could see all the way to Wisconsin," your father said. "But I don't think that's true. I think it was just water. I think it was just water, and it was blue, and it was very cold. But your father wanted me to see Wisconsin, so he said you could see it, and I said I could see it. And then you shouted down at us, and your father held my hand, and I understood that we were going to be all right, that I was going to be all right, that there would be a life in which our girl stood on the top of dunes and shouted down at us, that the world was going to make itself small enough for us to hold, that we would hold it, that we would hold it a long time." She stopped. She looked at Kelly. She said, "There, that's the rest." Kelly could not speak. Ruth said quietly, "Write it down. Somebody write it down." Grace, on the other side of the room, picked up the plate of crackers and cheese to give herself something to do with her hands. She said, "I will, honey. I promise. I'll write it down." Then she went out of the room because she had to. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone. She called Carmen. Carmen was at her kitchen table with the last of the sympathy cards open in front of her. She answered on the second ring. "Carmen," Grace said, "you need to come, right now." "Is Ruth all right?" "Ruth is telling the story," Grace said. "Ruth is telling the story." Carmen grabbed her coat. She left the cards on the table. She drove to Sunrise. Kelly was in the yellow chair beside her mother, holding the notebook open on her lap, taking dictation with a fine-tipped pen borrowed from Grace's clipboard. Ruth's voice was quiet, and it faded sometimes, and Kelly waited every time, patient, ready, and every time Ruth found her way back. Ruth talked for 3 hours. She talked about a diner on Route 2 in 1969, where a young army private in a canvas jacket had ordered blueberry pie at 11 at night and had looked at her over the counter and had said, "You are the prettiest thing I've seen in Ohio." And she had said, "I'm the prettiest thing you've seen anywhere," and he had laughed until the pie fell off his fork. She talked about their wedding at the courthouse 3 months later. When it had rained so hard, the judge had joked that God was crying with joy or with warning, one of the two. She talked about their first apartment above a hardware store on 5th Street, and the sound of the pipes at night, and the way Victor would put his hand on her belly once she was pregnant with Kelly, and would say, "I promise you, I will not fail you." And she talked about how Victor had almost never made a promise in his life because he thought promises were showy, and how she had understood from him making that one that he was, for the first time, afraid of himself. And how afraid he had made himself brave, and how brave he had, for 52 years, remained. Kelly wrote it all down. When Ruth's voice finally gave out in the late afternoon, she reached over and put a hand on the green notebook, and she closed it gently. She looked at Kelly. She said, "That's the middle. There's more. Come tomorrow." Kelly said, "I'll come tomorrow." Ruth said, "Bring the dog." Kelly said, "I'll bring the dog." Ruth closed her eyes. She slept. Carmen sat in the doorway. She had not needed to write anything down. Kelly had done it. Grace had witnessed. Ruth had spoken. Carmen had only stood there and listened. It was the finest work she had done in a year. She drove home. She parked her car. She climbed the stairs. She opened the door of her apartment on Cedar Street. She sat down at her kitchen table where the last of the sympathy cards was still open. The card was from a woman named Anne, who had signed only Anne, no last name, and who had written, "Your mother told me once, at a Christmas party 10 years ago, that grief was just love that couldn't put itself down. I have thought about that every day since. I wanted you to know." Carmen read the card 3 times, then she folded it, then she stood up, then she went to the wooden bowl, and she took all the opened cards, and she put them into a neat stack on the table. She counted them, 31 cards, 31 people who had loved her mother enough to write, 31 people who had loved Carmen enough to write to her about it. She had not seen any of them for 8 months. She sat down. She picked up a pen. She began, one by one, to write back. Outside the window over Hargrove, Ohio, the winter sun set in a sky that looked, for a moment, like the color of an old brick collar with the word Scout stitched into it. Down at the corner of Millfield Avenue and 3rd Street, the bronze marker at the base of the bus stop sign caught the last of the light. The words on the marker glowed softly for a full minute before the sun dropped behind the roof of the corner store, and then the marker went back to bronze, patient and quiet, waiting the way it had been made to wait. The number 12 bus, on its last run of the day, rolled by at 4:43. Angela was still at the wheel. She had been driving the route since Dennis had put in for the transfer to a route that ran farther from Millfield and 3rd. Angela slowed as she passed the corner. She looked out at the empty sidewalk. She saw the small marker. She smiled softly to herself. She kept driving. Above the wood stove in Dennis Park's kitchen, in the framed photograph Louise had hung there, a medium-sized brown dog with 2 symmetrical ears looked out into a warm kitchen with an expression that was not quite a smile, because dogs do not smile. but that was something very close to peace. In a yellow chair by a west-facing window at Sunrise Care Centre, an old woman in a yellow cardigan slept, holding a small laminated photograph loosely in one hand, and dreaming, perhaps, of a dune in Michigan on which her daughter had once stood at the age of 7 and had shouted down to her parents, "You guys are so small." On the kitchen table in a small apartment on Cedar Street, 31 sympathy cards sat in a neat stack, each of them opened, each of them held, each of them, at last, welcomed home. And on the corner of Millfield Avenue and 3rd Street, where a brown dog had waited for a man for 2 years, there was no dog. There was only the sidewalk, and the pole, and the plaque, and the memory of a good and quiet man who had ridden the number 12 bus every weekday morning to sit with his wife by a west-facing window and to read to her, from a green notebook, the story of their life. There was no dog, because the dog was home. There was no man, because the man was gone. But the plaque was there. It said what it said. He was here. And because he had been here, everything that came after was possible. The reunion in the common room, the notebook found in the canvas jacket, the daughter who had come back across a continent, the bus driver who had put a bowl of water down every winter morning for 2 years without telling anyone, the reporter who had opened her sympathy cards, the old woman who had, on a Saturday afternoon in December, remembered her own name for the first time in a year. He was here, and now, in every small, warm room across a small, quiet town, the people who had loved him were too. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below with the name of someone you have lost and would still like to say something to, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can find their way to you. Because sometimes a story is not really a story. Sometimes a story is a way to sit for a while beside somebody we miss and to notice that they are still, in some quiet way, sitting beside us too.